Lewis,
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you great. Awesome. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you virtually again. Really looking forward to this chat today.
Yeah, dude, of course.
Um,
Um,
awesome. Just to some housekeeping, just for everybody who's tuning in on this. If you have any, I want to make this conversational, and Lewis and I will chat about RocketPlace and all things building a company in this crazy 2020 world we're in right now. But if there are any questions that are top of mind to the audience, please try to put them in the Q&A piece, I think on the right-hand side of the chat, and I will try to weave them into the conversation, or at least kind of the general themes of it. But maybe just to kick things off while we get everyone kind of here, just by way of background, everyone, I'm Rafe. I'm an early stage investor at Canaan Partners, VC fund based out of the Bay Area, investing in seed through Series B companies. And I have the pleasure of doing this fireside chat today with Lewis, CEO and founder of RocketPlace. So Lewis, maybe just to kick things off, would love to hear a little bit about your background and then also kind of weave into the story of how and why you started the company.
you got it, man. Rafe also didn't say that he has the pleasure of doing this fireside chat from Hawaii. So, but so we should all be very, very jealous. He's like acing work from home right now.
But, yeah, I have a nice view in front of me. But,
exactly. Yeah. So my background, RocketPlace is my third venture-backed company. And I've been on the investing side. I was at A16Z. I've worked for Y Combinator, and my co-founder from my last company, Ernest, Ben Hutchinson, and I decided to found RocketPlace about a year ago, and maybe just over a year ago. And what RocketPlace is it's a marketplace for B2B professional services. So the way you could think about that is, anybody who's listening to this call, any startup, we have problems that arise every single day. We might need expertise. We might want to hire an agency for PR, maybe a mobile dev shop, maybe an SEO firm. And so, that's what RocketPlace does. RocketPlace helps get those two sides of the market connected. But really, it came out of our own personal struggles here, where, as entrepreneurs building companies, we were constantly dealing with this question. Actually, we still, even though we run RocketPlace, we deal with this all the time about, hey, what would be a good firm to work with on this? Who's the right expertise for that? When I was at Andreessen Horowitz, we actually built huge teams of people to help companies solve this problem. At Y Combinator, we have a tool called Bookface, which is kind of like an internal discussion chat where every single day founders were asking basically these types of questions. As an angel investor, every single day, people are pinging me to answer these types of questions. And it really, the problem doesn't get better as a bigger. Actually, the problem gets more challenging. Imagine you work at a 500 or 5,000 person company. You're not going to ping your CEO and ask the CEO to ask all the investors to help you get connected with an expert. So that's what RocketPlace does. And yep, we actually launched on Product Hunt last week. So, we're just getting started.
Yeah, I think a really good point just to emphasize is that the problem does get worse as the company gets bigger, right? I think there's potentially more information out there, but then it's just stuck in more people's heads, right? And it's harder to get that information out to everyone in the group. So definitely understand.
You would almost think that company would have like some sort of internal knowledge, but imagine you're working at a big company like 5,000 people, and maybe you're on the product team or the marketing team and you want to do some user research. You're not going to like ping the company, right? Maybe your internal team, right. But you're not going to just like, send to all. So there's just this information doesn't live anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. And I know you casually sort of just threw it in there, but congrats on your launch last week. How did that go?
Yeah, it's been crazy. So we've had hundreds of service providers applying to be on the platform. If you think about it from a service provider perspective, and this is a remote work conference, we have all over the world, knowledge work is just proliferating like crazy, right? The actual skills that people are searching for is all over the world these days, but those folks, and we have the ability to collaborate globally in a way that we've never had to before, whether that's GitHub, Envision, Google Docs, Slack, Remo, et cetera, right? But how we find those folks and actually get connected to those firms, that's the next step here. And so we're having firms all over the world. It's unbelievable. South America, Europe, Asia, every single day. I mean, I get an email every time someone applies on RocketPlace, and it's like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., right? Because that's when those people are up all over the world. It's really cool. And then on the flip side, we're also making intros to service providers every single day so that those folks can get connected. And, we launched on Monday, and by Friday, 2 businesses had been hired. We're really proud of that, right? So it's happening really quickly. But, we're just at that very beginning where every single minute, a service provider who's on our platform, they're like updating their profiles. They're adding their clients, they're filling out the FAQs. So it's just starting to come to life, and it's been really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, this last week or so, I'm not sure how much sleep you must have gotten, but this is definitely a fun time for you in the business. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about kind of what it's been like to build a company during this time. Arguably one of the most unique times to be alive and to certainly build a startup and build a company. So maybe just taking it back 6 months ago, March, shut down, everyone went remote. Like, walk me through what was, from the CEO's point of view, like what were the first things top of mind, the first few decisions in the first few weeks that you knew you had to get out there and kind of change in order for you to continue to scale and build the business? Yeah.
So it's kind of funny because absolutely, COVID hit all of us, but in a certain sense, I think we were more prepared than most. So RocketPlace as an idea is we're trying to connect people remotely. And so as a result of that, we had built what I would almost call like a hybrid remote culture from the very beginning. So we have an office in Canada, in Vancouver, and an office in Palo Alto. And although we were certainly traveling back and forth more several months ago, we had already built into the culture like daily Zoom calls. So, for example, every single morning we do a stand-up where, a Zoom stand-up, basically, every single morning. We had already built our productivity stack in GitHub, in Envision, in Slack, et cetera. So actually that didn't feel like it changed so much for us. I talked to a lot of founders, and I think that one of the things that I'm really thankful that I had the experience from my last company. So at my last company at Earnest, we had several hundred people. We did eventually get to multiple offices, but really it was all based in San Francisco for a very long time. And there was a lot of muscle tissue about running a company, things like, that are more than just meetings. It's kind of like the cultural fabric of a company. Things like stand-ups, things like lunches and dinners, things like, game night and other activities that I think we all as CEOs really need to remember the importance of that human and personal connection in this remote environment. And so, it's things like, well, okay, sure, your team's all remote right now, but are you doing any sort of weekly lunch where everyone can just eat lunch together by, via video chat and just connect with each other? Or are you doing other things that are not work related where people can connect? And so I think that's really important to remember. But yeah, for us, I think the big thing that changed was really around the mentality of, it was almost like we went from hybrid to full on remote work. And if anything, the business on the demand of what we were building, the value prop really accelerated much faster. That we were already working on this, but it felt like, oh my God, because all the people we were working with no longer could meet face to face. And so that really felt like, okay, we have a moment here. We have to move really quickly to capture it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I want to follow up on that. I just want to make sure that that I think one thing you said that was subtle is like focusing on building culture and in a remote environment early on. It's hard, right? And it's easy for us to forget the Zoom happy hours or the lunches that we could all do in person. But it's those little things like that I think help a lot tremendously, especially during this time when we're all stuck at home, right, with our family or with our dog.
One thing I was just thinking, there's a lot of connective tissue in a company that happens in the 10 minutes after a meeting, right? So you finish a meeting, but then not in a Zoom world, but then like people leave that meeting and you're like, hey, how did that meeting go? How was my presentation? Or did you hear what he just said? Or was that weird? And there's actually connective tissue that happens in the 10 minutes post meeting. I'm lucky that my co-founder and I still work in the same office. So we get a lot of that connective tissue, but we have to kind of remember, if you're starting in a new company, for example, in a remote environment, when that meeting ends, who do you talk to? Do you get to where's your 10 minutes of connective tissue to be like, is he always like that? Or, and I think that little stuff is important, and we need to make sure we bake it in, because we do have a tendency to go from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. This is something that candidly that I'm still trying to figure out best practices for, right? Because in some cases, I have a meeting with colleagues and I want to debrief or chat with them, and in the same way that you would probably stop by their office or their cubicle right after a meeting, right? And just be like, hey, just to make sure I understand this correctly, is this what you heard also? Or, hey, how was that meeting? That was way too long. Like that could have been much shorter, or just catching up, things like that. In some cases, it feels like another Zoom call is too formal for it, or scheduling another Zoom call is too formal for it. I also feel like sometimes if I just call them out of the blue, I'm kind of infringing on their time or space. So how do you?
Well, I think formality is a really interesting concept to think about. So Zoom, as you point out, feels very formal. It needs to be scheduled. Slack, on the other hand, feels very informal. So we have moved a lot of that less formal connective tissue to Slack. But it's not just chat. Like, I will actually pick people on my team and I will just hit the call button. It's kind of like, it's like ring, 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 and it makes noise, and I don't schedule it. And it's kind of weird because we're all like, oh my God, you're just calling somebody and like out of the blue, you didn't schedule this. But it's kind of like walking up to someone's desk or knocking on their door. Right. And I actually think it's good. It's like a different, the form factor of Slack has that informality enough where it's like, hey, I just want to chat for 5 minutes, right? And it's kind of like tapping someone on the shoulder or knocking on their office door. And I like switching the form factor, but it's one of the ways I've thought about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I'll try that with some of my colleagues after this. So I want to go back to something you mentioned, which was, once COVID hit, we went remote. You started to feel this pull from RocketPlace, from the service providers that you're adding onto the platform in a way that was different, right? Because the need suddenly accelerated, the need and the demand increased. What did that look like? And how did you come to that conclusion? Like, what signals were there?
Well, because what happened was traditionally for the customers we serve, the service providers, really their primary channel is word of mouth. And word of mouth historically has an incredibly local component to it, right? And if you kind of think about any service provider you've interacted with, like I'll give you an example. It would be very common for like an executive recruiter, say, to like have a meeting with a VC in person to get to know that VC and be like, hey, I specialize in CFO searches and we're friends. Let me take you out to drinks. And like when your portfolio companies have CFO searches, you should send them my way, right? And so, and that really broke down in March. Yeah. And so that kind of word of mouth, local architecture changed. Now, I still think that you can do digital word of mouth. You can do word of mouth in the world of COVID. But the way everyone started thinking about business development was really much different. And, RocketPlace filled a really good need there, where all of a sudden you have all of these folks who are traditionally kind of constantly networking, constantly doing coffee meetings, and even when they get a meeting, they're like bringing people to their office or going into their office to present their work. All of a sudden needed to develop new muscle tissue around remote work and remote business development. And that was actually a really good spot for RocketPlace to be, because they didn't have that tool before. And
do you anticipate, even looking out to the future, if we go back and start meeting people in person, and hopefully you and I get to see each other in person one day, how will that change the interaction on RocketPlace, on the marketplace? Or do you anticipate continuing to have kind of the virtual conversations with the service providers as you onboard them?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing that's happened here that we're really never going to go back to is I do believe that we're going to have pendulum swings in the remote work world. Like, I really do believe people are going to go to offices again once we can. It's kind of like, I think people are going to rush to offices, actually, right? Now, offices might look a little different, but it's kind of like people are craving human connection, right? So as soon as you can go, like, I bet like when Facebook opens up its office again in 2021 or whatever it is, I bet like people are just going to be like, oh yeah, man, I'm coming to the office. This is great. Free lunch all day, right? Like hanging out with my colleagues. So I do think that we're going to have a little bit of a pendulum swing back. But that said, I think our comfort with using remote tools and collaborating is going to change for the long term. Things like, almost if you think about like business travel, right? Yep. For a very long time, my old job, I used to do, I don't know, close to 200,000 miles a year flying all over the country to do meetings. It was like those meetings had place, right? Despite the fact that it's so much more efficient to do these video calls for everybody. And I think that's going to change, like the appropriateness of we can collaborate across the globe digitally. I think people are just going to be, we kind of were ripped through the chasm as a business society, and we're on the other side of it now. And I think we're I think we're not going to just fall right back to the old way of doing things.
I mean, I think I agree with a lot of that. The kind of stigma, right, of, oh, let's do a video call rather than meet in person, and those having different levels of importance, I think that has gone away, and that right now by necessity, and I think in the future that stigma, that lack of stigma, will hopefully remain. For video calls as well.
Tools are proliferating. RocketPlace is just one of many tools that are proliferating now. So all of a sudden, if you go kind of historically, if I was going to hire a firm, it was very likely I was going to hire a firm in the Bay Area. But I just think it's going to become more and more common that I'll be really comfortable hiring a firm that could be in a different city, it could be in a different country, and we feel very comfortable collaborating because we have the tools today to do that, right? And we've gotten used to using those tools.
Absolutely, yeah. To your point, the comfort, the stigma has really gone away. Does that, shifting a little bit to company building, do you feel the same way about hiring as you continue to scale and grow the business as well?
100%. Again, we decided that we were going to build a remote culture, like a hybrid culture, like have multiple offices right from the very beginning. But even as we have grown as a company, I think we are even more, now we have people in, I'm trying to think how many different cities, 3 different countries for sure. Probably like something like 6 different cities. I'm trying to think how many different cities. And I think we're going to be increasingly comfortable about finding talent wherever we find great talent. Yeah. That said, back to my other point, I think people are going to want to be in the office, right? So we do have 2 offices, and I think when we can transition back more, like I love being in the office. Actually, I find it quite an amazing luxury to have super fast internet and my workspace. So I think people are gonna value. I can go to the office and hang out with my colleagues. Now they might not do it every day, but I think it's going to be a valuable thing for people in about a year.
Yep, I agree. How are you, kind of on that point, how are you and the team thinking about the timing of that decision, right? Of coming all back together, either in a hybrid environment or back in person, sort of what's driving some of that decision and the timeline for that?
To be honest, that's a really good question. We're not even talking about it, right?
Yeah.
We kind of, the things we're talking about are like, what's on the product roadmap and who's replying to these customers. So I think that'll just kind of naturally happen. That's more of just an organic thing. Our team's small though, to be fair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to do a lot of people planning that larger organizations might have to do. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of touching on that planning point, how did you as CEO navigate 2020 so far? I can't believe it's October already, but when March hit, I'm sure you had a very different plan for 2020, end of year 2020, than maybe you do now. Like, how did you navigate the roller coaster of ups and downs over this past, call it 6 to 8 months?
Yeah, I think there was definitely, the March period was a shock to the system for everybody. Right. And just globally. I think that we were lucky in a few senses. Like we were, there was a couple things we did. I mean, at the time we had a WeWork that we were just like, let's get out of the WeWork, right? We don't actually a WeWork, but like a WeWork lookalike.
Yeah.
So there was a 2-week shock to the system, but after that, we kind of just leaned into, let's keep we don't know what's going to happen. Let's keep our head down and build product. Mm-hmm. I think that it took us a while to be like, okay, what's going on here? What's the right time to launch? What's the right way to talk to customers? Yeah. There was something I think that happened. I want to say July, maybe it was June, where we were actually hearing from certain customers, like the market changed and people were actually getting really busy. And if people weren't busy, they really wanted to be back to work, right? It would kind of like we moved through a period of time where like, nope, I want more business, but bring it on, right? And that was when we could start really feeling that accelerate. We were like, we have got to get out there, start helping clients. We moved into beta right then with our service providers and just felt like, okay, this is here to stay. Businesses are doing well. People are hiring, hiring service providers and things like that. Like we kind of got over, there was we got over that 3-month period of the world's going to end. And we kind of just kept our head down and worked on product. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so that kind of leads me into my next question of how do you even think about 2021 and kind of the future of
Yeah,
RocketPlace too?
I mean, I
Balancing like keeping one, ear to the floor of just making sure keeping a pulse of where the market is heading and kind of adjusting to things, but at the same time trying to be a little long-term planning and
yeah,
forward-looking as well. How do you balance those?
I think that I wouldn't say that COVID is having a huge effect on my long-term strategy. And I think that that's because I already believed when we founded RocketPlace about the trend here. And so it's really about what is it that we're doing and how do we do more of that faster and better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um, so maybe the way it has influenced me is, if anything, it's made me more confident in the path that we were pursuing, right? Nothing has happened over this period of time that's basically said, hey, this trend that we were on, this strategy we're on, something's off here. If anything, I'm like, no, this is so right. And it's more important than ever. And we just have to like get out there and push forward in all the ways as fast as we possibly can, because this opportunity is huge and it's happening.
Yeah, yeah, that's really exciting to hear. That your market got pulled forward so quickly due to some of these effects. I have one kind of final question around the future of where you think the world is headed, but anything that you want to share with the audience and group that that would be relevant to either RocketPlace or to any learnings that you've had that could be really helpful that we didn't touch on?
Well, I mean, the thing I'm also starting to think is certainly something we're thinking about in RocketPlace is probably there's like, what RocketPlace does today is a lot about discovery. And I think in this global world, discovery is a big problem. But there are probably two other points that we're also focused on for the future that I think that, for people out there, they're all probably tons of the people are on this call are entrepreneurs. Collaboration is so it's like, okay, you get past the discovery piece. How do people actually collaborate in an effective way? So we're thinking a lot of, we spend a lot of time thinking about that on the product side and how we're building that collaboration into our product. And then actually the final thing is payments infrastructure is something that I'm spending a ton of time thinking about. Like international payments infrastructure is a pretty big pain point. It's not, because there's a lot of components there. There's like a trust component, and there's also like an actual just like logistics, like how do you actually do it? Maybe there's a regulatory component as well, which is different when you kind of are living in the like word of mouth local architecture world, where it's like, okay, I met this executive recruiter through Andreessen Horowitz, and they sent me a contract, and their office is 2 blocks from my office, and we can we pay them, they bill us and we pay them. That's a lot different when you're hiring a service provider across the world and for both sides of that market. So that's something we're also spending a lot of time thinking about. And I think, that's a little bit of like when I'm talking about how the tools are changing, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for entrepreneurs broadly. Yeah.
Yeah, that you actually kind of stole my last question, which was, where do you think the kind of unsolved problems are? Like this remote environment and the way that we're working now has obviously presented new opportunities, but at the same time, it presents additional challenges, right? Like you said, around now that discovery, we can connect with service providers all across the world. How do we collaborate with them? How do we do payments with them? All these little things that weren't as big of a challenge are now part of the infrastructure that needs to be built out for the future.
Yeah, and I honestly think collaboration is going to be huge. Yeah. We kind of all instantly got sucked into Zoom, for example, but I actually think we're going to see a lot of different, like there's a YC company I'm not an investor in. It's kind of like Zoom for developers, right? Yeah. I think there's actually going to start to be all sorts of different types and form factors of collaborating. We're in Remo right now, for example, right? Yeah. And so starting to have a broad set of tools And I think like a very interesting set, like as a founder, I can't build every tool. So what I'm looking for is tools that I can integrate into RocketPlace, right? So like different tooling as a service are things that I want, right? So I can integrate it right into my company and provide that to my customers on my platform. I don't want to have to build every tool.
Yeah, that's a great place to end it. Actually, if there are folks that are working on that, reach out to Lewis and RocketPlace.
Well, cool. This
Lewis,
was awesome, Rafe. Thank you, man.
Yeah, I want to thank you for the time today. This was a ton of fun. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, Lewis.